Hi everyone, my name is Kade Crockford. I work at the ACLU of Massachusetts on technology issues. And I'm going to talk for a little bit about some problems that we see with respect to algorithms and civil liberties. There's like the framework of what we believe is required for any kind of program that is going to use big data and algorithms or machine learning to shape people's lives. And that obviously is not just limited to civil liberties that the ACLU typically deals with, like criminal justice issues or even equitable housing issues that we've done a little bit of work on in terms of racial justice. Like we sued JP Chase a couple years ago. You probably didn't know that. That was very exciting for us. But also in new spaces too. Like I'll tell you a little bit about a lawsuit that my colleagues in Idaho did last year related to algorithms and discrimination. Basically the framework is this. Anytime large data sets are going to be used to make determinations that impact someone's life or a community's life, three things need to happen. There needs to be radical transparency with respect to the data that is fed into these systems. There needs to be radical transparency with respect to the algorithms that are the code, the formula that is chopping all of this up and spitting out some sort of answer that will shape someone's life. And then the third thing there needs to be radical transparency on is the training data, the training models that are used to process the data and the algorithms to produce a result for whoever's using the system. So that probably makes sense to a lot of people in this room. Some of you might not make any sense to, but I'll give you an example of how that works in practice. The second thing, so there's first is transparency. The second thing is accountability. We need to make sure that there are people who are technically qualified to actually examine these systems once there's radical transparency is brought to bear on them. So we at the ACLU, for example, have recently started hiring technologists, and this is one of the reasons why, because lawyers, frankly, are ill-equipped to look at these kinds of problems and try to figure out where discrimination is occurring and how, and if it is, how to deal with it. And that brings us to the third piece, which is oversight. So, you see through transparency that there's a problem, there's discrimination as a result of an algorithm or machine learning being applied to some sort of social or political or economic situation. And then we have some sort of accountability whereby people are figuring out how that problem is occurring, and then there needs to be oversight in the sense that somebody who's technically proficient and capable to keep an eye on the corporation or the government actor that is using the algorithm has to make sure that going forward the discrimination doesn't recur or pop up in a different way. So I'll give you a few examples of what this actually looks like in the real world. The first one is a case that, like I said, my colleagues in Idaho worked on that actually deals with Medicare. So weirdly enough, the ACLU of Idaho a few years ago started getting all these phone calls from people who were totally freaked out because their Medicare reimbursement payments had dropped by 20 or 30% overnight. Which obviously, if you are on a limited income, which everyone on Medicare is terrifying and means that you may not be able to get adequate health care or reimbursements for things like home healthcare, disability, whatever. So people were freaking out and they called the ACLU and they said, we don't understand what's happening. This has never happened before. I've been getting Medicare for 20 years and it's been relatively consistent. My payments have been increasing, not decreasing, and all of a sudden hundreds of people were calling and saying that there were these radical, abrupt cuts to their Medicare reimbursements from the state. And so the ACLU figured, we're going to call the state Medicare office and this will be a relatively simple problem to solve. They'll say, this is a mistake, and we're going to fix it, whatever. Turns out they did not say that. They said, we're actually using this new system whereby people come into the Medicare office and tell us about their lives and about their health problems or whatever, and we put that information into an Excel spreadsheet. That's the data, right? And then that data is fed into a proprietary algorithm, which, by the way, we're not going to give you because it's a business secret. And then out of that is spit a recommendation that we implement about how much we're going to reimburse someone for their Medicare for that year. And that's the reason why people are seeing these differences. Have a nice day. So the ACLU was not satisfied with that response, as you may imagine, and said, you have to give us this algorithm. Actually, we want to take a look and see what's going on here. I said no, so the ACLU filed a lawsuit. Judge said, you have to give them the algorithm. This is crazy, it's probably a due process violation. So they handed over the algorithm. The ACLU applied that accountability to the transparency. They had people who are actually technically proficient look at what this system was doing, at both the data inputs and at the algorithm they were using to determine the reimbursement schedule. And they found that it was a complete mess. It was a complete mess. The data was a total mess. They were putting junk into the system to the degree that some of the Excel tabs weren't lining up or something, so there was just literal junk going into this system that didn't make any sense for a lot of people in a lot of these fields. And then the algorithm, the statistical model that they were using didn't make mathematical sense. It was flawed. And the mathematicians that took a look at it were immediately like, this is not right, this math is wrong. So that was a problem. And then the third thing, which I think is really maybe the most important thing that I want to drive home tonight, is that people in the state's Medicare office did not understand anything about how the technology worked. They literally did not understand anything about it. They had been told by some company with a fancy marketing brochure, we will help you reduce Medicare payments. And that's what happened. But it happened for terrible reasons that violated people's due process rights, which is what a judge ultimately found in ruling in favor of our class action suit. So I think the most important thing to recognize here is that the folks in the Idaho Medicare office were basically wowed at the prospect of a fancy computer whiz-bang system helping them do what they had long done in a different way, better. And that is a really important lesson, because technology is great, right? Technology can do a lot of things for us. But when people say the words artificial intelligence or machine learning, a lot of people who don't actually know a lot about what those words mean get really excited and think that the future is here, in the sense that computers, no matter what we put into them, are going to give us back a result that is superior to what we could do without them. And that's obviously not true. Technology just simply doesn't always work, right? I mean, we know that, I plug my phone, my fancy-ass Apple phone, into my fancy-ass Apple computer, and half the time, it doesn't sync. And I'm like, that's not supposed to happen, right? That's clearly not supposed to happen. We cannot be making determinations using technologies that the vast majority of the public, including decision makers at the Idaho Medicare office, do not understand. Unbelievable. My colleagues in Idaho talk about how they did depositions in this lawsuit, and they would ask people who were supposed to be responsible for understanding how these systems work. So, do you understand X about this system? And the person would say, no, but there's this other person in my office and they totally get it, so you should ask them. That person's in the hot seat. Okay, do you understand what this algorithm is doing with this? No, this other person. It literally became like a circle of finger pointing in the Idaho Medicare office, where it became very clear relatively quickly that no one understood what was going on, no one understood the math, no one understood the data, and they were just, taking the word of this private company that what they were selling was going to be better than what they were doing before. So that's obviously bad in the Medicare context, right? But we fixed it here, at least. It's really bad when we are talking about people's lives to the degree that the criminal justice system is using these types of technologies, right? So I'll just give you one more example of how AI, or rather I should say, sort of like a technophiliac obsession with the promise of AI can go radically wrong and hurt people. So there's this thing called predictive policing. Has anybody in here heard of this? Okay, so predictive policing basically is the theory that if you take a lot of historical crime data and other kinds of data and process it through an algorithm, on the other side you will get better information and advice, frankly, about what police departments should be doing in terms of allocating their resources. And this can work in a couple different ways. The way that most police departments do it is just, it's sort of a reification of what's called hotspot policing, which is something that cops have done for a long time, and basically just means they see, okay, there's a lot of drug or theft crime in this one neighborhood, so we're going to send a bunch of cops there today, and that's how we'll patrol. Predictive policing is sort of one way that it's done is just like a fancy new version of that. So there's like a lot more data, and there's a new algorithm that some company, so there are a lot of them, one of them is called Predpol, sells to cities on a subscription basis and says, this is proprietary, by the way, don't give it to the ACLU when they ask for it. And so that's one way that this happens. And it's basically the same, that the Predpol system says, okay, based on historical crime patterns in these neighborhoods, here's where we think you should send officers, here's where they should be walking around, here's where they should be on bikes, here's where they should be sitting in their patrol cars, etc. But there's another way too, and there are problems with that, which I'll talk about, but there's another way which is even more pernicious, which is what the city of Chicago is doing. Has anybody heard of this? They're actually doing it specifically about individual people in Chicago, not about neighborhoods, but about human beings, which is sort of reminiscent of something that the government of China is doing, which is like a people rating system. Has anybody seen Black Mirror in here? Okay, so you know the episode where there's like a people rating system? Well, the Chinese government is actually doing that. And the city of Chicago is sort of doing it too with this predictive policing software, whereby they've figured out, using data that they won't tell anybody about and algorithms that they won't tell anybody about, who in the city is likely to commit gun violence, right? They do have a serious problem with gun violence in Chicago. So Rahm Emanuel, like neoliberal hero, has decided that Silicon Valley is the way to solve this problem. Maybe instead of just not closing health clinics and schools, which he's also doing. So his police department pays this private company to tell its Chicago Police Department who individual human beings with names and birth dates and social security numbers, who is likely to be violent in the city. And then his cops are basically told, these are the 1,500 people who you need to look out for in the city of Chicago. These are the ones who are going to do all the bad stuff. Well, turns out basically all of them are black men between the ages of 16 and 30. And there are a lot of problems with that, obviously. I mean, one of them is that in the United States, and this is the last thing I'll say, in the United States, we are guilty until proven innocent. That's how it's supposed to be, right? In the United States, when we get arrested, people often say, oh, if you do the crime, you do the time. Okay, maybe, But the problem with that is that when you get out of prison after doing the time, you cannot escape the time. The time follows you. It follows you everywhere. And with these new systems, it doesn't just follow you when you try to get a job, right? In the sense that the boss is going to say, I don't know, you have a criminal record, I'm not going to hire you. Or when you try to get public housing, when the government says, no, you can't live here because you have a felony. It follows you in the sense that the police are going to be on your ass everywhere you go, permanently. And maybe if you're on a list like this in Chicago, you will never be able to escape the things that you've done. So the last thing I'll say about that is that we're moving towards a future where a police officer, just imagine this, is walking down the street, and in his contact lenses, he has the internet and facial recognition software that is scanning every single face he sees walking down the street, scanning every license plate of every car that he sees driving down the street. And up above everyone's head, in his little field of virtual reality vision in his contact lens, appears either a number or a color. Maybe the whole person turns a shade of color, red, green, yellow. Red, of course, denoting someone is dangerous. Yellow, suggesting that someone is maybe a security risk. And green, suggesting that someone has never had any interaction with law enforcement that could suggest that they might be a danger to the public. That's not a really far off future, actually. And I just want to urge you to think that there are two different reasons why this is a bad idea. One is what I talked about before, that we are not the worst thing that we have done, right? None of us. And the idea that we can never escape the worst thing that we have done is truly frightening and dystopian and authoritarian. And we have seen over and over again videos of police officers brutalizing and murdering black people in this country. Enough, I think, to understand that when, in this future, a police officer sees a red human being or a scary risk score floating above someone's head, the way that they physically interact with that person in material space is going to be frightening for that person. And we also know, because of terrible Supreme Court law, that basically all police officers have to do to get away with literal murder is to say, Your Honor, I feared for my life. And if that risk score is a frightening number, Your Honor, I fear for my life, that person had a very scary risk score. It is going to be a proxy for the kind of racism that we've seen for hundreds of years in this country. So that is another way that these algorithms and machine learning systems basically just reify existing prejudices and forms of discrimination. And then the second way it's dangerous is that, like, Tamerlan Tsarnaev may have been green, right? People like Ted Bundy would have looked green to those cops. So it's also just stupid security policy. So that's it. Thank you.